chairs in there to sit in while you watch the movies. But
Oh
it's a
man.
wonderful, wonderful place.
That sounds awesome. I'm actually I'm not gonna have a whole lot of time to do like tourism stuff because there's a retreat there and I've got to, get back for work. But
Well, you don't
part of it,
have to
I'll
do the
scope it out.
tourism at McMenamins. It's all there
Yeah,
for you.
I'm
I
definitely gonna
do
have to scope it
recommend,
out.
I have food recommendations out the wazoo.
Oh, well, please send them. So yeah, I mean it's gonna I have a place that I'm staying. It's just a couple miles from the retreat center, and this is a retreat for doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So we're actually it's going to be a pretty cool experience. But yeah, I would love to see what you got. I'd love to see your resources. So yes, yes, Alim, I am doing. There's a revival going on in Birmingham that my friend Ramon Billingsley is putting on, and I'm honored to be part of it. I'm actually doing a lecture, not a sermon, but they have lectures. Like each one of us is doing a lecture, and then they have a preacher afterwards. And my lecture is on white Christian nationalism. So it's gonna be I'm gonna be doing uh, Jesus and John Wayne, the book, and I'm also gonna do Willie Jennings' Christian Imagination, Religion and Race. So I'm gonna kind of be using those as my textbooks, and yeah,
Will it be recorded?
I believe so. I believe so. May even be live streamed.
Cool.
I'll check and find out from Ramon
Cool.
if they're going to live stream it. So I'll share it
Yeah, let us
share
know.
it when I get the info.
Now, is it
Yeah.
in connection with a church or?
Yes. So I don't want to tell you the wrong name. So whoops. Ah, I've got I've got two monitors and not enough space. I need a third one.
You can always post it later.
Yeah, I'll post it later. But it is in Birmingham. So if those of you who are streaming and online, if you have a chance to come, I'd love to see you there. I'll post it on the St. Junia Facebook page too. Great to see you all here. Thanks for coming today. Um, let's see. Why don't we do it this way? Miller, do you mind being the liturgist?
Sure.
And then Paula, do you mind being voice of the people?
Great.
And then Rob, if you could do the Hebrew Bible reading.
Okay.
And then Miller, do you mind doing the New Testament reading also?
Got it.
That would be great. Okay, so hopefully, goodness. Hopefully, I don't have too many, um, what do you call it? Typos in the liturgy today. So
No
here
worries.
we here we go.
Good morning. This is August 4th, and on this day in 1789, the French National, sorry, who needs typos? The French National Constituent Assembly abolished feudalism with its system of lordship and serfs. And on this date, in 1944, the Gestapo arrested Anne Frank and her family in Amsterdam. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 145. God gave orders to the skies above, opened heaven's doors.
And rained manna on them so they could eat.
He gave them the very grain of heaven.
Each person ate the bread of the powerful ones.
God sent provisions to satisfy them.
God set the east wind moving across the skies and drove the south wind by his strength.
He rained meat on them as if it were dust in the air.
He rained as many birds as the sand on the seashore.
God brought the birds down in the center of their camp, all around their dwellings.
So they ate and were completely satisfied. God gave them exactly what they had craved.
And today's Hebrew Bible reading comes from Exodus chapter 16. The whole Israelite community complained against Moses and Aaron in the desert. The Israelites said to them, "Oh, how we wish that the Lord had just put us to death while we were still in the land of Egypt. There we could sit by the pots, cooking meat, and eat our fill of bread. Instead, you've brought us out into this desert to starve this whole assembly to death." Said to Moses, "I'm going to make bread rain down from the sky for you. The people will go out each day and gather just enough for that day. In this way, I'll test them to see whether or not they follow my instruction." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole Israelite community, 'Come near to the Lord, because he's heard your complaints.'" As Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned to look toward the desert, and just then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses, "I've heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will have your fill of bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening, a flock of quail flew down and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the desert surface were thin flakes, as thin as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" They didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, "This is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat."
Today's New Testament reading is John 6, 1 through 21. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and came to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus replied, "I assure you that you are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate all the food you wanted. Don't worry for the food that doesn't last, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the human one will give you. God the Father has confirmed him as his agent to give life." They asked, "What must we do in order to accomplish what God requires?" Jesus replied, "This is what God requires, that you believe in him whom God sent." They asked, "What miraculous sign will you do, that we can see and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, just as it is written, 'He gave them bread from heaven to eat.'" Jesus told them, "I assure you, it wasn't Moses who gave the bread from heaven to you, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. The bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said, "Sir, give us this bread all the time." Jesus replied, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." May God bless the hearing of this word. Thanks be to God. Anne Frank wrote, "Riches, prestige, everything can be lost, but the happiness in your own heart can only be dimmed. It will always be there, as long as you live, to make you happy again. Whenever you're feeling lonely or sad, try going to the loft on a beautiful day and looking outside. Not at the houses and the rooftops, but at the sky. As long as you can look fearlessly at the sky, you'll know that you're pure within and will find happiness once more."
So thank you all for getting us started with worship. We'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And for those of you who are streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you want to lift up a prayer request, feel free to do so, and we will incorporate it into our prayer. Also, if you're watching on one of the streaming services, if you want to, if you would just click like or make a comment with where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you. We appreciate that. I appreciate you being with us today. I'll keep an eye on YouTube. Would one of you keep an eye on Facebook for prayer requests?
I've got Facebook up.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the encouraging words of Anne Frank today. Oftentimes we are conscious that our happiness, our joy is stolen, that it gets dimmed. Sometimes the simple words and the simple actions and the simple things seem too simple for us. Help us to find comfort and happiness in the simple things, the rhythms and the openness to our own experience. We lift up to you all those places where conflict or scarcity or pain or anxiety make it difficult for people to find happiness. Places especially that are torn by war, people who are oppressed by unjust policies. We lift up to you places where there is scarcity, not because you haven't given us an abundance, but because of engineered problems with distribution. For all who are hungry, God, we ask you to give them bread for their bodies. We're mindful of the saying that sometimes the presence of God is known most clearly in bread, especially to those who are hungry. For those of us who live with abundance, for whom food is not a problem, we ask you, Lord, to feed the hunger of our souls, because oftentimes in the midst of affluence, we find ourselves in famine. God, we also lift up to you situations and people who are close to us, and I invite those of you who are on Zoom or streaming to share your prayer requests.
For protection, for the men and women fighting the fires in the West.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Camille's mother and the care of the elderly.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the people of Gaza.
Lord, hear our prayer. For the Olympic boxer who is facing so much abuse online right now.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the trans folks who have to hear all this hurtful rhetoric.
Lord, hear our
Lord,
prayer.
hear our prayer.
God, for your church and your followers who have been led astray by hateful rhetoric.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for growing things.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For leaders and policymakers to take climate change seriously.
Lord, hear our prayer.
In thanks for the harvests and those who grow the food of the world.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For families divided by politics.
Lord, hear our prayer. For nurses and healthcare workers.
Lord,
Lord,
hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for all the prayers that we have shared and for the prayers that we don't even know how to put into words, we know that you intercede for us with sighs too deep for words through your Holy Spirit, and we give you thanks for the words that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come, and let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So thanks again for getting us started with worship. Special thanks, Rob, for doing the voices of the people of Israel. That just brings joy to my heart when you do that. That was great. Um, Today we get into the story about I just lost my where's my document? There it is. We get into the story about the aftermath of the feeding of the 5,000. We talked about the feeding of the 5,000 yesterday or yesterday, last week. Sorry. Time loop. Um, New Testament scholars talk about something called the messianic secret, that Jesus is hidden, especially in the first three gospels. He'll do a miracle and then he'll tell folks not to talk about it. He'll heal someone and then he'll say, shh, don't tell anybody. And this mostly happens in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In those gospels, Jesus is generally pretty reluctant to do public miracles. In fact, at one point in Mark and Matthew, people come up to Jesus and they say, show us a sign, and then we'll believe. And Jesus says, I'm not doing any signs for you people. The only sign you will get is the sign of Jonah. Now, his followers later said, that means he went into the belly of the beast for 3 days and then he came back, right? But he said, that's the only sign I'm going to do. And really, even that was mostly in secret. I mean, he showed up to some women, he showed up to the disciples in a locked room, but it was still largely a secret. And that's what we call the messianic secret, the tendency for Jesus to avoid doing public magic tricks or impressing people with his miraculous abilities. Now, John's gospel is different because John is a signs gospel. John will even say, like, Jesus does the miracle at Cana, and John says, this was the first sign that Jesus did. And he'll do something else, and John will say, this is the second sign Jesus did. And he's like really deliberate because John's agenda is to get people to believe. So he wants them to see the signs, and he's enumerating them. It's like, here's the proof. But even John wants to take a step back from people's initial enthusiasm about seeing miracles. He problematizes the miracling and the magic tricks that Jesus does, because I think John is really an explanation for the messianic secret in the first three gospels. So John was written later. John was written, maybe much as 30 years later. And I think John is trying to explain a little bit about Jesus's attitude towards his divine power. So most folks, and even in casual conversation, people talk as if miracles define the Son of God. We often hear about walking on water or miraculous birth being the kinds of things that prove Jesus was the Son of God. Because he could do magic tricks, that proves he's supernatural like God. But largely that's because when we think of a Messiah, or we think of the supernatural, we think of a rescuer, a hero who comes in with a magic sword and a destiny foretold. We think of a Harry Potter or a Luke Skywalker, right? We think of Jesus like a hero. But Jesus doesn't have a lot of patience for that kind of attitude. So when Jesus healed the 5,000, when Jesus fed the 5,000, right, in our story from last week, sat people down, took a couple of loaves and fishes, blessed it, and somehow, miraculously, there was enough food for everybody. When people saw that, They thought back to the story of Elisha, one of the great prophets from 500 years before. Elisha fed 100 people from a single takeout container, and they had to get more takeout containers for the leftovers. I mean, that's the story of Elisha. And people saw when Jesus fed 5,000, it's like, wow, this is just like Elisha, but bigger. All right. And we see this happen in other places. The disciples even remembered the story about Elisha calling down fire from heaven on his enemies, right? And at one point, after visiting some Samaritan towns where Jesus didn't get a good reception, they said, Jesus, you want us to call down fire on these towns? Because they're thinking, oh, this is like Elisha. It's like we're living the dream. We're doing the supernatural stuff like in the Bible. And Jesus says, you guys don't get it. That's not what we do. Anyway, they think the people who are following Jesus are like, he's like Elisha. All right. And then like, he's even bigger than Elisha. He's like, maybe like Moses. Right. So follow this dialogue. I want to kind of read this dialogue to you again and listen to what's going through their minds, right? These people, they've already seen Jesus do like Elisha times 50, right? No, Elisha 100. Right, yeah, Elisha times 50, he fed 5,000, right? And so now they're like, okay, let's amp it up. Let's go even bigger. So instead of being like Elisha, you could be like Moses, our hero from 1,500 years ago. Okay, so that's the setting for this diet I just did by feeding 5,000 people. You're just after me because you want I just did by feeding 5,000 people. You're just after me because you want a free meal, feeding 5,000 people. You're just after me because you want a free meal or you ate all the food. Like I ate all the food. Like I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I think that is dead wrong. In fact, I think it's the opposite of what Jesus intends. Okay. Look, the people are following Jesus. They're so excited to go see him, not because he's handing out free sandwiches. They want to see a miracle. They are excited about seeing a miracle. And I think when Jesus says, you guys aren't here just to see a miracle, you're here because you got food that you really wanted. I think he's not saying you're just after a free meal. I think he's saying there was something deeper that you guys are really after. I think Jesus is making a positive attribution to these people. He's not insulting them. I know that's the way a lot of religious people like to think, but I think Jesus actually thinks very well of these people. He says, you guys aren't just looking to see magic tricks. You guys want something deeper. That's what I think Jesus is saying. And so then he says, don't work for the food that doesn't last, but for the food that endures for eternal life. And I think there, he's not saying, don't work just for a sandwich, work for something deeper. I think he's saying, the miracle, the excitement that you're feeling, that's the food that doesn't last. Let me tell you about the food that lasts. I think Jesus is actually helping these people through their stages of spiritual development, saying, I know it's exciting to see divine power, but let me tell you what real power is. Right? This is what I think Jesus is saying here. I do not agree with the preachers who think that Jesus is insulting his followers. Now, sometimes in the Gospels, Jesus does insult his followers. I don't think this is one of those times, okay? He says, work for the food that endures for eternal life, which the human one will give you. God the Father has confirmed him as his agent to give life. Now, if we were going to make a list of reoccurrence of words here, I would say, note how often Jesus talks about life. Life, okay? So they ask him, what must we do in order to accomplish what God requires? Again, if you're a good Jew of the first century, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God? So they're talking about the requirements, right? What should we do? So they found him. And by the way, the only thing they've said so far is, hey, when did you get here? And Jesus has said, let me tell you why you're really here. You're here because you want something deeper. And they say, okay, well, tell us what to do. See, they're on track. They are tracking him. And Jesus says, this is what God requires, that you believe in the one that God sent, or you trust, maybe a better word, in the one that God sent. So do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God, trust the one that God has sent, the one who's come to give you life. Trust in him. That's also, by the way, to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. And so they go back. Here's the thing. They go back to the miraculous sign because they're still thinking, all right, you've already bested Elisha. Now we want to see you best Moses. All right, you're the real stuff. We want to see what you can do. We're excited. Like, show us the next thing. They say, what miraculous sign will you do that we can see and believe you? What will you do? Oh, we have an idea. Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, just as is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Elbow, right? I've got a great idea about what you can do. And then Jesus says to them, I assure you. He says, this is, by the way, he keeps saying, I assure you, which I like this. Like, really? Come on. I'm telling you for real. It wasn't Moses who gave the bread from heaven to you, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. The bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Life, there's the life, giving life again, right? And so their response is, Sir, give us this bread all the time. In other words, continually. Now, again, preachers who want to insult his followers or the people looking for him say, oh, they're wanting free sandwiches all the time. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, we understand you're talking about the real deal, the real stuff, the stuff that gives us the good life, that gives us abundant life. Give this to us all the time. This isn't just like give us manna, free food from heaven all the time. This is give us the real stuff. And he says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So he's telling them, you guys are looking for a Moses or Elisha, and you want me to do what they're doing. And what I'm saying is you're missing that I'm not Moses, I'm not Elisha, I'm the manna. I'm the bread. I'm the stuff that you need to take into you to have good life, to have abundant life. Now, I think it's important to make a distinction here because we so often talk about Jesus as Savior, Redeemer, and we tend to think in terms of human categories as hero, as someone who comes in and rescues. Jesus is basically saying, I'm not your rescuer. I am the air you breathe. I am the food you consume. I am the stuff you drink, right? He's saying, this is what I want you to take into you. The miracle is not bread coming down from heaven or me magically feeding 5,000 people. The miracle is what's happening in you every single day if you will receive it. Like these miracles, like this is the thing. You are here on this planet. You are a miracle. The fact that that you have food to eat is a miracle. Like to see the miraculous in the everyday, to have it continuously. I think that's what Jesus is after. So it's not just a flash in the pan, a one-off. It's not just a feeding of the 5,000. It's not just raising Lazarus from the dead. It's a continual renewal, a miraculous renewal. And if we could see the miraculous happening, we would understand that this is manna. It's given to us every day. And we get just what we need, not more than we need. Right? I mean, the whole deal with manna is they would go out and they would collect just what they needed. So the idea is it's given to us daily. Later on in John, Jesus says, abide in me and I'll abide in you. You are the vine, or I'm the vine, you are the branches. And there's this intimate connectedness that for Jesus, it's like, take me into you, consume me, make me part of you. That's what Jesus is saying through these miracles, that the signs, the reason that we're downplaying the signs is that the signs are like a step that you might need to take before you get to the real understanding, which is that every minute is a miracle. Okay, that's what I got today. Love to hear your response. By the way, I'm eating manna. It's called cinnamon toast. And it's light and sweet. So good.
I love to think about so many people I think look at Jesus' miracles in the same way that like we sort of look at the bona fides of any given saint, you know, like, well, they did X, Y, and Z, and therefore they deserve to be elevated above the rest of us. And I like that Jesus is like, don't talk about this stuff. Because the real miracle is that we're still talking about him, you know? We're talking about the movement that he created. And I think I like the idea that if we talk less about the magic, which I mean, I could totally see him like doing miracles just because, you know, he overflows with compassion, you know, like he can't not. But at the same time, what he wants, what will last is what people do after he's gone, you know, the taking care of each other, the feeding each other, you know, the possible alternate explanations for the feeding of 5,000, you know, where like it was just everybody bringing food. I think he wants people to believe that they can do it, you know.
No, I think you're right on. And I think there's sort of a, just when you think about religious experience, how easy it is for someone to have a supernatural experience. I mean, I've had, you know, spiritual high points, and then it fades, you know, a week and a half later, I'm back to normal, right? You know, we want those things as though they will somehow pin our spirituality in place. Like, oh, now I believe, as though it's not going to ebb and flow. And part of it is that, you know, that consistent, the stuff that's lasts is the important stuff. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, Rob.
So to kind of follow up on that, like the idea that Jesus wants us to understand that we can do it, I think it's really, really significant that, you know, these, I put it this way, I see a connection between that with what you were saying about you know, Jesus saying, look, I'm the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, the food you're eating. Like you know, all of this is a miracle, right? It's not about this flashy act. I think it's very significant that the miracles that we're talking about here are also things that actually we can do. Like, I mean, so the wedding at Cana, like Jesus turning water into wine, he does it at a command, but we also know how to turn water into wine. We invented wine, right? We understand the chemistry.
Absolutely.
Right. We don't do it quite the same way as Jesus, but like, yes, that is a thing we know how to do. Growing food to feed 5,000 people, we know how to do that, right? I mean, planting and then receiving a harvest, like what a miracle that is. Actually, I watch Miller garden in our backyard here, and the fact that like, so one of my favorite little things that happens in our garden, right, is we have this compost bin, and so sometimes stuff goes into the compost bin, and then later on stuff gets planted in the compost, and whatever Miller is planting, we end up getting these volunteer tomatoes.
Oh yeah,
in everything that end up having to get replanted somewhere else, right? So I mean, you know, this is like Jesus and the multiplying of the tomatoes, right? Like, so I think, yeah, you know, we're not talking about, you know, a magician sawing an assistant in half, right? Which incidentally is just an illusion anyway. It's not real. Those tomatoes are real.
yeah.
Oh, and spoiler, we can bring people back from the dead now. You know, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
after a brief death, but
To a point, yeah.
like,
Yes, absolutely. Well, no, I think it's a great point. I mean, the everyday miracle, and that can, when I say that, it can sound cliche, but I love the way you put it. Like, there's this volunteer abundance that just pours out of the ground. Like, that should be mind blowing on a regular basis. You know, like the fact that even the fact that I put something in my mouth and chew it up and swallow it, and it becomes energy that allows me to keep living, is a ridiculous miracle. Like, when I think about all the complicated stuff that comes together to make that happen is mind-boggling. And I think even the more we understand scientifically, ideally, the more in awe we should be, not less. Oh, now we understand it. Now we can do this. No, like when you understand, yes, bringing someone back to life, shocking them or stopping their heart, putting a new heart, bringing them back to life. Good Lord. I mean, that's amazing. Anyway, go ahead, Paula.
Um, some people seem to have the ability to see those everyday miracles all around them, and others are just totally blind to them. I have a friend on Facebook who is a flower gardener like me, and she had a couple of weeks ago all these, I think she called them pipe vine swallowtail caterpillars in her yard on some kind of vine that birds were eating. So she cut her whole vine down, brought it in her dining room, and put it on her table. And for days had all these little caterpillars crawling all around her dining room. And then this week she posted where all around her dining room there were these little pupa cases where they had made cocoons or whatever. And now she's waiting for all the butterflies to come out in the dining room so she can open the doors and let them outside again. But I think that is the most beautiful thing for her to go to all that trouble just to save something that to most people is that insignificant. But I think the people who see those miracles best are children. I can't tell you how many times a grandchild has run into the house to say, come see what I found. And it might be a tiny little mushroom this big, or just the first blossoms on a tomato plant. And they're just so attuned to them. And as we get older, we start to block it all out, I guess, because we think there are more important things in the world. And that is such a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I think you're right. I mean, I think so. Jesus talks about abundant life. And when you're talking about people who are able to see that stuff in those people, that's where I see abundant life. Like you talk about a spring of eternal life bubbling out. People who see that stuff and then share it, it's like, wow, that is the kind of life that I want. Right.
And he said to let the little children come to him. So apparently they've got something we don't.
I mean, frequently, yeah. Go ahead, Miller.
Yeah, so talking about like the ordinary, I mean, I think I read somewhere like that the manna that the Israel and especially reading this description like of like the flakes on the ground, the manna that the Israelites found could have been mushrooms.
Yeah.
So like, but like there are people who would say that that sort of speculation is blasphemous, but like I think that's also missing the point because I mean, how miraculous that like there was food in the desert that just appears overnight, under the dew, which is another like thing that makes me think it's mushrooms, or fungus or lichen or something. And then they ate it and it was safe and they felt good,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, like how is it not miraculous if like it was some natural process? Because I mean, I don't know, thinking about miracles as some like Bible cinematic universe, like like these are the special powers that God has.
Right.
I think we have to look around and realize that we live in the same universe that they're talking about, and if we see something that seems, I don't know, like the miraculous is there,
Yeah. I like
Camille,
Terry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Camille writes, I always liked when Christ said, you will do these things as well. Seems like that is seen as the pinnacle of being a spiritual being. But what I think might be overlooked is the biggest miracle is when you do what Christ taught us to do. Love your neighbor as yourself and to love God with all your heart. Now that is magical.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Absolutely. Yeah, I think Miller, tagging on to what you said, I think Terry Pratchett said, just because you know how it works doesn't mean it's not magic. I That comes up a lot in the Tiffany Aching books, but I think it's very true. Like it's sometimes knowing how it works almost makes it more magical. And Camille, to your point, when I think about, people who actually do love their neighbor as themselves, um, I mean, those are the best stories we tell, those are when we think about what actually causes change, um, those are the stories that are most important. Those are the miracle stories. Absolutely. Yeah. Other thoughts, reflections? Go ahead.
And yet all over the country, that whole, what does the Lord require of you to walk humbly, mercy, justice, all that.
Mhm.
I am so sick and tired of Christians and pastors who have no idea what it means to be humble because they think they have all the answers.
Yeah.
And I have been so enraged this week with all the abuse that this woman boxer at the Olympics has been getting from people who are supposedly who think they actually love mercy and walk humbly. And
hmm
I want to slap them upside the head.
in love, slap them with love, right? No, I totally get it. No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean that what we see religion often does. And I mean this has been frustrating. I mean, as you say, I've been frustrated as well. Um, you know, seeing family and people I know hop on the outrage train, on the ginned up outrage train, which is really there to it's being done to make people's lives harder. I mean, like
Yes.
that's the whole aim of this ginned up outrage. Um,
Well, then
and
there's the social media angle that it's we're monetizing
yeah, exactly.
ginning up people's outrage, which is
Yes.
sorry.
No,
And
absolutely right. There's
and
a
we're
profit.
getting votes doing it because people fear what they don't understand.
Yeah.
And so they're oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to shut
That's
up.
all right. Well, so there's a profit motive behind it too, as you said, as you point out, Rob, that helps distort our relationships with each other in society. And I think one of the important things I wish we could use this as a criteria is just what Jesus lifts up here is what gives life. What creates abundant life, a sense of abundance instead of scarcity. So much of that is centered on scarcity and a fear of death and a fear of like not getting, like I'm losing something if someone else does well, or feeling like, I mean, so much of it is rooted in anxiety and fear instead of what actually gives abundant life. What I've really appreciated about seeing, I haven't watched a whole lot of the Olympics, but some people have posted this online also, just the diversity of human beings. I just like body types. You got, Simone, I saw a picture of Simone Biles. I just like these are human beings. Like these are people. And the diversity of body types to put, or women doing shot put, or versus the equestrians who have to be short. And like it takes all these different body types, people from all over the world, strengths to perform all these different tasks. And no one does them all well. And it's like, oops, I can see why to the Greeks that the Olympics was a kind of religion, because it's like, look at to the gods. And uh a, a, a woman whose body may not fit a particular stereotype of woman, who is able to perform at a peak level, gives glory to God. Like I don't
Amen.
see why that's hard for people to understand, but for me, like centering it on abundant life, like what brings more life into the world. Go ahead, Rob, but you got your hand up.
Yeah, I really think it's worth taking the time to notice. Let's see how to say this. It's worth taking the time to notice um, that the prevailing ethos
Hmm.
among these outraged religious types is it's perverse how utterly ancient Roman it is. I mean, so
Yeah.
transphobia, misogyny, racism, these things are all intertwined, right? This is really just about the prescription and the performance of really intricate hierarchy.
Hmm.
And that's what people are invested in.
Hmm.
They're invested in continuing to feel better than the people they've been told they're allowed to feel better than, and making sure that they personally are doing it right.
Hmm.
They have to be confident they're performing what was prescribed for them. And, like these people will throw around all this Christian terminology, but it has nothing to do with anything.
Hmm.
That's the thing that I think we really have to take the time to notice. It just has nothing to do with anything. People
That's,
are living in an ancient Roman moral universe
hmm.
full of hierarchy and patriarchy and enslavement. And so it's all policing. All policing. Is this person's body acceptable? Is this person's gender presentation acceptable? Are you femme enough? Are you not femme enough? Are you enough of a man? Are you an alpha? Like,
Hmm.
it's just bananas. But the only way I can make sense of it is to recognize, oh right, this is using people have adopted Christian language because they felt like they had to,
Hmm.
but their commitments are prior to that.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
it's just a different worldview. It's a different belief system.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it has nothing to do with there is no longer male or female, slave or freak, Jew or Greek, Jew or Greek,
You
right?
noticed.
Yeah, yeah. It has nothing to do with that, right? So I want Miller, I want to let you talk quick, I just want to tag on there. Like I've seen several things that point out the fact that the reason there are men's and women's categories anyway is because men didn't want to have to compete against women. Men didn't want to be shown up by women. Like and like any one of these women in any competition would kick my butt, right? I mean, as a man, and that there are a lot of men who are really insecure about that, you know? Like that it's I mean one of the main reasons. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead, Miller.
I think I like so I remember so okay, I've been reading this book about the famine in Ukraine back in the 30s, the Holodomor uh capitalist, but he said so the people in Britain, in order to create their empire, they colonized these other peoples, African peoples, other people around the world, and just squeeze the life out of them.
Mhm.
So we can't do that. We have to do this internally. We have to colonize our own people and
Mm,
squeeze our own people so that we can, leap forward, and have a better life.
mhm,
But I think what Jesus is saying, I don't know, when he talks about eat me, you know,
mhm,
take me inside you, have me become part of you.
mhm.
I think he's sort of saying you don't have to keep eating other people.
Mm,
The earth can
right.
hold you. You've got enough.
Mm,
Like all maybe the magic of Jesus is that he looks around and he sees, oh, yeah, there's enough.
mhm,
We've got what we need here.
mhm,
There's, you can find food on the ground. You can turn water into something that brings you joy.
mhm,
You can, um, you know, all of our medicine comes from the earth.
mhm.
Um, I guess this idea of scarcity
Yeah.
seems like something he's trying to push. And I mean, if you want to talk about gender stuff, like people stuck in the binary, in the very like Roman idea of like what is male, what is female. Like, have you seen what can happen when a trans person takes hormones? Like the body does amazing stuff, you know, the body changes. And it's, I don't know, the fact that the body is just like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay. You know, like, and it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It's really cool to watch.
Yeah.
Well, like you and I were talking about, that these are things that, you know, their body could have done at an earlier phase, right? Like the natural processes that happen in utero when the body's going to come out in a certain way.
Spoiler alert, we all
it's just happening at a different time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all female at one point.
Right.
In the womb.
We all have this. We all have the same parts, just arranged in different ways.
So like they've seen that. I mean, you know, this may be a little graphic, but like people who take testosterone, AFAB people, you know, people assigned female at birth, they start to grow prostate cells. You know, it's not binary. It's not like the body is capable of so much more than just being whatever one thing that it is, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Right. I mean, it kind of points back to this miraculous abundance, or how the fecundity of life that's, like, as you're saying, is all around us. Absolutely. Go ahead, Paula.
I think Rob is absolutely right when he says it's all about hierarchy. But I also think that in a lot of cases, it's not about I want to be at the top of the hierarchy. I just want to make sure I'm not at the bottom of the hierarchy. I need another group below me so I can feel better about myself.
Yeah, certainly.
So it doesn't really matter what level of income, what race, what gender, whatever you are. You want to feel better than another group that you're immediately going to think is less than you. And especially I won't say jackass, all the men that I saw posting about this woman boxer this week.
Yeah.
I think they're very insecure in their own masculinity, and they're really wanting to feel better about themselves by saying, look, I'm more of a man than this man is who claims to be a woman.
Right. Yeah. No, I think there is, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of insecurity. Yeah. Yeah, Rob, I like the quote. Yeah, I've seen that before. I can't remember. All Americans think of themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. You know, like, oh yeah, pretty soon I'll be a millionaire. Yeah. Having someone to punch down on does seem to be, or the famous crabs in a bucket analogy, that the idea is there's scarcity and we can't let anyone, you know, we have to find a way to undercut someone else's performance, especially if they're of a different group than mine. I think about, you know, the way boxing was back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, you know, the Great White Hope, all that kind of stuff, right? That the idea that, you know, white men would lose to black men in boxing was really intimidating and scary, and people had to, you know, felt like they needed to do something about it. And this is that same thing, isn't it? It's that same.
Bobby Rigsby and what was her name? Now it went blank. Bobby Rigby, and who was the woman he played against? The tennis player.
Tennis? Oh yeah.
The War of the Sexes.
Billie Jean King.
Billie Jean King.
Billie Jean King. Yeah. The Battle of the Sexes.
Camille said Christ asked us to look at each other as equals, no more male or female, and to take care of each other. And that might be why the gospel seem woke these days.
Yeah.
I saw a person, just to sort of follow up on what Paula was observing about wanting to be able to punch down. I saw a person who was actually going through the motions online of defending the Algerian boxer and saying, "Oh yes, she's a woman," just like, you know, the Italian boxer, but neither one of them are as good as they think they are. And then it's like, well, the Algerian boxer is going to get at least bronze, right? That's baked in now. That was the last thing I saw. So, but he had,
Yeah.
he had the need. He had the need to be like these lady boxers.
Oh, right.
Good Lord. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
stand there and get hit by one of them.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take it like a man.
Well, in Simone Biles' word, when the lady criticized her hair, she said, "You don't have a gold medal."
Yeah. Well, and the people, this is before the Olympics, but people who were saying, "Oh, she's full of herself because has the goat, great GOAT, I don't remember if it was a patch or something like that," and she has said, "No, like literally, I am the greatest of all time." Like,
She's earned it.
I'm not full of
And you know
myself.
what?
Stating a
That's what humility is about. It's about
Yes,
accepting your strengths and your limitations. So that
exactly.
was a humble response.
Oh my gosh, it was perfect. It was perfect. Like I don't know what you mean. I'm not full of myself. I'm just stating a fact. I happen to be the greatest of all time. Sorry if that rubs you the wrong way.
I do want to take a moment to like hold space for like the fact that trans women are not at the Olympics.
Right, exactly.
They cannot compete.
Yes.
And these people, there are plenty of people out there, who would want to.
And
there's one trans man, I think, but at the Olympics that we know of. But yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so much of this is like it's proxy hatred. It's like, we're doing this, we're hating on this person by proxy so we can kick on these people who aren't even here. And
it's transphobia that's hurting not trans people.
Exactly.
Surprise. Just like racism hurts white people too.
Right.
How can a trans man be allowed to compete, but a trans woman can't? I don't understand that.
I don't know exactly the details. There's one person. I'd have to look up their name. But and I don't know what category they're competing in. But yeah. And so there is a disproportionate.
So women get the short end of the stick one more time.
I mean, yeah. Trans women probably have it worse of all, to be honest.
Right. Well, and
Anyway.
I think to your point, Miller, something that we often, I think, fail